Stone Cold Prose, building better words.
In a healthy society, the weak copy the strong. In a decaying one, the strong adopt the methods of the weak. Truer words were never spoken. Is it time for us to examine the phenomenon of the candy-ass king, also known as the tyranny of the weak? Hi guys, welcome back to Stone Cold Prose, where we build better words, better thoughts, and better men. I'm Miles Watson, novelist and author of many award-winning novels, including Cage Life, Sinner's Cross, and The Chronicles of Magnus. I spent 12 years in Hollywood, another 10 in law enforcement, and now I break it all down and build it back better. So let's get into this. Like a lot of people, I live in two worlds. On the one hand, I spent the aforementioned 10 years in law enforcement and criminal justice. I love combat sports. I'm a black belt. I've been beaten up in rings, cages, and on mats. I've met 4 heavyweight champions, and I can handle a shotgun. Pretty good ski shooter. I work out twice a day. In college, I was in a fraternity and drank enough beer to kill a Tyrannosaurus. I'm partial to red meat, and I love whiskey. I feel like my man card is in good standing. On the other hand, I'm a huge fucking nerd. Now, this statement requires a little expansion. Those other things came later in life, but I was always a nerd. I started watching Star Trek in my high chair, and I never stopped. I saw Star Wars in the theater when I was 5 years old, triggering another obsession. And when I was 8 years old, my mom introduced me to the Tom Baker version of Doctor Who, about 3 decades before most of the rest of America had even heard of it. I loved the original Battlestar Galactica, and I owned enough Dungeons & Dragons paraphernalia to fill a bookshelf. Even today, I can occasionally still find a 20-sided dice in the corners of the house I grew up in. I owned, and still own, an Atari 400 and an 800 XL computer. I owned them long before I'd ever heard of Nintendo. And I had troves of toys and comic books. These things were common enough in every childhood back in the 70s and 80s, but I continued my interest in them long after most of my friends and classmates had moved on to other interests. Sports, rock music, sneakers, clothes, girls. And even when I finally took an interest in such things, I retained my essential nerdiness. It has never gone away. Important fact, I would never wish it to. Now, because of said nerd condition, I have joined a number of fan groups on social media platforms like Facebook, including groups that celebrate and discuss various facets of nerddom, from Sherlock Holmes to Friday the 13th, the TV series. One of those groups focuses on the original Star Trek, and it's been a very enjoyable experience. It's always nice to commune with people that remind you that you're not alone in your weird, nerdy obsessions. Not long ago, I posted my thoughts about an episode called This Side of Paradise, in which the redoubtable Mr. Spock of the eyebrow falls victim to parasitic spores that cause his emotional controls to collapse. Now, in these posts, I try very hard to be thoughtful and respectful, to listen to dissenting opinions carefully, and in general, just to keep things in the positive spirit with which the group and all the other groups like it represent. My post concentrated on the writing and the acting in the episode, and it was very well received. Only one person took it upon himself to make trouble. He was offended, very offended, you see, because I hadn't understood the anti-religious implications of the spores. In his mind, their intoxicating effect represented organized religion, which offered a false and mindless paradise in which no advancement could ever take place, and which had to be destroyed by bringing people violently back to reality. Now, I grant you, this would have been a great point to make or to argue had it been presented as an argument. But he presented it as an attack, a personal attack, with a lot of insults on religion, religious people generally. I guess he thought I was. Several people took issue with his tone and general attitude, and the group's administrator stepped in immediately, which is what group admins are supposed to do in these circumstances. Except that rather than admonish the troll, she shut down all commentary on the thread. Her reasoning was that the troll's feelings might be hurt by the other members ganging up on him, dogpiling him. Why? For being a troll. The fact that he'd started everything with his needlessly combative and condescending and insulting attitude didn't matter to her. He felt offended, and he had voiced his grievance first. So everyone else had to be muzzled to please him. Now, this incident is trivial, and I wouldn't mention it here except that I feel it's part of a much larger problem besetting our society, besetting the entire West. To wit, people seem to think that the act of being offended grants them certain special rights. Say the magic words, "I'm offended," and poof, a shield forms around you, protecting you from any further words, symbols, facial expressions, tones of voice that might hurt your widow feelings. A lot of people have talked about this, from George Carlin to Ricky Gervais. But the most fascinating aspect of this phenomenon is that in every case, the person who claimed to be offended first is the only one granted the benefit of these rights. In essence, it's like a gunfight in the Old West. Whoever draws the offended card before the other wins. But the cultural effect of this nonsense is much worse than its cause, because now institutions, schools, businesses, the government, and yes, even Facebook nerd groups are so eager to slap special privilege on the offended party that they no longer take into account the possible absurdity of the incident which supposedly caused the offense. It's enough simply to experience a feeling of offense, regardless of its validity, and the whistle blows. If we take my troll as an example, this was a person who was offended by the fact my take on an episode of a 50-year-old television program didn't correspond with his own. He took it upon himself to take me to task for this in an insulting and aggressive way, which he evidently had a right to do because of the aforementioned special rights granted to him. At the same time, he was shielded by his special rights from the counterattacks launched by others on my behalf. The fact that he was alone in his opinion meant nothing to the conscientious admin of this group. The entire commentary had to be shut down just to please the troll. The feelings of the others, well over 100 people, meant nothing. Now, I want you to imagine a scenario in which 100 people sit in a room in a comedy club. A joke is told by the comedian. 99 people in the audience find it funny, but one person shouts, "I find that offensive," whereupon the police immediately enter the club, shut down the premises, and send everybody home. That roughly is what happens at universities, businesses, and online groups in America and all over the West on a daily basis. I've seen it happen myself over and over and over again in my real, non-online, my professional life. And what frightens me about this shit is not so much that it happens, because fools and cowards and nutless wonders from HR that enable fools and cowards will always be with us. No, it's that so many people accept it without objection as normal. History has repeatedly shown us that the only thing worse than a tyranny of the majority is a tyranny of the minority. Because where the strong may rule solely through their strength, which is bad, the weak can only rule through viciousness, and that's worse. Cultural rules such as don't hit a man when he's down were imposed by the strong to protect the weak. On the other hand, underhanded fighting, ambushes, hitting below the belt, etc., all that, those are historically the methods of the weaker party. They were devised by the weak to attack the strong. And while it's certainly fair for a weaker party to fight dirty, if fighting dirty will roughly even the odds, it becomes extremely dangerous to continue those methods when the weaker party ends up in power. Which brings me to the quotation with which I began this video. Implicit in the idea of don't hit a man when he's down, or don't raise your hand to a woman, or help old ladies across the street, or be kind to animals, is the idea that with strength comes responsibility, what I refer to very originally as the Spider-Man principle. Those in power have obligations not merely to passively avoid wickedness, but to actively do good. That is what I mean by the methods of the strong. The first principle of any democracy is the majority rules but protects the rights of the minority. The first principle of a dictatorship is the minority rules through intimidation. If we look at a place like North Korea, we can safely calculate that only a small percentage of the population actually supports the Kim Jong government or wants it in power. At the same time, there's very little prospect of it toppling anytime soon. The weak have employed the methods of cruelty and intimidation to keep hold of their privileges, and the majority is helpless because of it. There are very few, if any, situations in life which justify the tyranny of the minority, yet increasingly in America, in the UK, even in Ireland, in Europe, we tend to find ourselves muzzled and held hostage by the weakest person in the group, in the room. Now, some will say, but Miles, the strong don't always behave themselves either when they're in power. Well, this is very, very true. And it's why democracies and republics, and yes, even our schools, have built-in safeguards which ensure, at least in theory, that the rights of the minority will be protected. Now, we all know in practice, these often fail. But the fact they exist at all means our hearts were in the right place. And the fact it ought to be possible to wage war against bullying while simultaneously not allowing the bullied to become, in effect, the bullies themselves. We must always remember that in free societies, the majority will rule, but it must respect and protect the rights of the minority. So in the end, societal harmony is all about roughly balancing the needs of both sides. The mistake is when we go so far in the direction of protecting the minority that the rights of the majority are no longer respected at all. And one person can hold 100 hostage with their feeling. Well, guess what? This is where we find ourselves now. If you've watched my rants against wokeism, you already know how we got here. But the important thing is to fight against this tendency wherever we find it. At work, in government, and online too. I found out the hard way, professionally, that wishing it would just go away won't save you when your time comes to stand before the Stitch Fix bitch from HR. The fact is, when someone tries to jam up the works by barking, "I'm offended," you probably have a moral obligation to pause and ask yourself whether you've given legitimate reason for offense. And if the answer is yes, guess what? You should have the guts to apologize. But if the answer is no, telling them to take a flying fuck at a rolling donut is a legitimate response. The revolution against candy-ass kings and those who would establish a tyranny of the weak has to start somewhere. Folks, if you enjoyed today's video, please remember to like, subscribe, comment, ring the notification bell, and remember to check out my books on Amazon. The link is in the description. I drop scripted content every Tuesday and Friday and shorts every day of the week. So I hope to see you soon. Until next time, stay cold. Spock Eyebrow.